Welcome to the voice of mountain sledding, the Mountain Sledder Podcast with Mike Reed.
Welcome to this episode of Mountain Sledder Podcast. This is going to be a fun one. We got the former editor-in-chief of the Mountain Sledder magazine, Pat Winslow. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me here, Mike. This is my first time on a podcast. I'm happy to say. So
don't be nervous. It's just like all those years of creating content for the magazine, except for now it's live. Everyone's watching you.
Yeah, I know.
They'll be
and that's something that I
minute.
struggled with doing, videos, YouTube stuff for Mountain Sledder was just like, being put on the spot to be the guy in the face and
Well, just be natural. People are going to love you.
yeah, we're just going to have a conversation. And
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely excited about this podcast because a lot of the history of Mountain Sledder magazine, although I've been kind of around it and contributing to it and a part of it from, its early essences and golden, I'm genuinely excited to hear some of the more in-depth and some of your favorite stories or articles or, events that you've been involved in the magazine because it's got a cool history. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think so. And we've done a lot of stuff together over the years. And, I should thank you, first of all, because a lot of the connections that we made in the industry came through you as a filmmaker working with a lot of the athletes. And, we've gone out and shoots together and stuff like that. So, props to you anyways. And now it's kind of come full circle in the Mountain Sledder thing. So.
It has. Yeah, I'm glad we're both on here. It's going to be a lot of fun. Our first time collaborating on a shoot, I want to say was 2014, working with Rob Alford.
Yeah, I was thinking about that last night.
Yeah.
Like, when did we first go together? Because like you said, it's been a few times.
Yeah.
But yeah, with Rob, yeah.
You and Tim and Rob and I met up backcountry outside Revelstoke. I remember the day. Unreal. It was bluebird, great snow conditions. Access wasn't too bad. So, getting back in there wasn't too bad for all of us. And Robbie was sniping these cool big mountain lines where, we'd access it. We'd look from the bottom and say like, hey, can you do these sorts of things? In traditional Rob Alford ways, he just goes up, knows exactly where to come down, hits a drop halfway through his line. And it's just the epic, classic big mountain, what you think when you think big mountain backcountry snowmobiling. And Rob Alford, that's what he was doing. And I think that was volume 8. I want to say I was filming for 509 at the time. And yeah, that segment was a banger. It was really cool to work with him. And then, get introduced to you guys in the Mountain Sledder side was so fun.
Yeah, that day was awesome. I think that was kind of like my first real introduction to working with like a real professional of Rob's caliber where he was just, hitting everything and dialing it perfect. And it just blew my mind. I was like, this guy's doing everything that we are, you see a line and you're like, could that even be done? Sure enough, Rob goes and hits it and nails it. And I was like, wow, okay. I didn't think that anyone could operate on that level where they can just like, they know what they're capable of doing. They go out and see it. Okay, I can do this. Boom. And they hit it perfect. And it was just like, wow.
And that's the difference, I guess, of a professional versus, amateurs or entry-level riders is just like, it's not just taking yourself off that cliff or hitting that tabletop jump. It's how do you get to that tabletop? Could you even point out a tabletop jump if you're riding through the backcountry? So it's like being able to know the zone, access it, set up your sled properly, yourself properly, and then get yourself in the right position to actually drop that. Because like a lot of people watch those lines and they're like, oh, all you're doing is just riding down. How do you get to the top of that line? How do you know, what tree to be between and then what diving board is the correct one? Because when you go off that, people forget it's blind. We're looking at it from the front. So it's like, oh, you could see where his landing is and everything else. But from his perspective, you have no idea where you're going off, do you?
Yeah. And I think the professionalism is part of like knowing, okay, yeah, even by just looking at it from below, like, okay, I could probably work this angle or this line or to get in there and to know what they're capable of doing and just being confident to be able to do it. And it's so productive. Like that day, I have so many shots from that day.
Yeah.
Just because, Rob was just hitting everything. Bam, bam, bam. Yeah. And just put so much in the can that day.
This episode of the Mountain Sledder Podcast is brought to you by Mountain Sports Distribution and ShopMSD.com, your source for top brands in sledding and powersports. From 509 to Highmark, Tobe to CFR, and their exclusive line of Mountain Lab gear, MSD is where you can find products tailored to meet the needs of serious backcountry powersports users. Mountain Sports Distribution has constantly been expanding their line of products each year, and I always look forward to what comes out next. From a custom Mountain Lab toolkit, which contains everything needed no matter what brand you ride, to super bright headlamps and even gear bags and tie downs, any outerwear and safety gear you need for riding, basically everything you'll need in a day of riding, you'll find at shopmsd.com. Upgrade your riding experience this season by visiting shopmsd.com. Top quality brands for your backcountry adventures.
I want to say he was on some sort of a prototype Ski-Doo at the time, 165 or 63, whatever it was at the day. And then he had it for, I think, a really condensed period. So we were all under the gun to try and get as much done as we could. So I want to say his entire segment was done in those 2 or 3 days just because we had the right weather, the right snow conditions. He was good. His sled was good the entire time. And we just, like you said, we're just like moving from one element to the next. And it was just working so well. And again, that comes back to the professionalism, working with that caliber of rider to say, like, line it up, ride through it safely. And it gives us that confidence knowing when we're gathering media that this guy's not going to wad himself. And here we are in the middle of, something no one wants to be involved in, right? So it gives us that confidence too, to be like, yeah, that's probably a correct feature or whatever,
Yeah. And I do remember there was one, I don't want to say sketchy thing that happened that day, but I got an awesome shot from it. So I was pumped. But I remember Rob was with, we're up on Turtle, I think. And Rob was coming up the hill and doing kind of like a big turnout re-entry and just, spraying the snow and ski hose in the background. It's like one of my favorite shots still. And came down and hit some weird snow or whatever. And down below was just like no man's land. Rob came off the sled and he held on somehow with one hand on the bars, and the sled was like trying to tumble and everything, and he was sliding down with it. And like you said, this was like this, whatever, probably prototype. I think it was a 2014. It was like,
it was a year
XM,
prior.
it was like maybe the second year of the XM. And I just remember being like, oh no.
This thing is going to be in a million pieces and we're going to have some explaining to do.
Yeah. And it's, like there's not that many of them, right? It's not like you just like call up Ski-Doo and, hey, sorry guys, I'll send
get another one.
But he held on to it, and I was just like, again, blown away. I was by just the ability of him to salvage that from just being gone in those
Anyone else would have let go of it and it would have just been in a million pieces. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It would have been
out of there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do find ourselves in a lot of different positions in these instances where we're filming demo or new product sleds coming out the following year, and it's got to be kept from the public. So you're riding, whether you're, riding in public areas, so you have to wear these bras on them or whatever, or a half tarp or something so public can't see them. And then you get into these zones where no one's around. But if someone does come, you got to go and hide this thing. How many times have you found yourself in that position where you're just like, man, this is unreal that I'm the first person in the world essentially to have this thing on snow?
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. That's a pretty cool feeling. And that's one of the things I've really enjoyed about working in the industry, working for the magazine, is the opportunity to go out and ride sleds that nobody else has been on. I mean, obviously the guys that are developing and testing them, and some of the athletes are, on those early stages, obviously, of development and stuff. But to have prototypes that were like, we're trusted to be sent out with, here's the sleds. We'll see you at the end of the day or whatever.
And in between, make them look good. Put them in a position where it's...
And that's tricky because, we want to show what the sleds are capable of doing so that we can say, we can back that up by saying, this, whatever's new and this is how it works and all that, but be able to show that as well. But at the same time, we're like, there's one of these. Like, you can't wad it into a tree or whatever. And we've been mostly lucky with that. We did... Sean, who helps out Mountain Sledder with a lot of the filmmaking and that kind of stuff, and product or the ride testing. He clipped a tree. I think it was 2 winters ago or whatever, and we were kind of sheepishly brought it back, and we're like, "Sorry, guys." And the guys at Ski-Doo were really good about it, but we felt pretty bad. So, but that's tough. It's like you want to do a good job of showing these rides, and it's a definitely special feeling to be trusted to be able to do that for sure.
They are cool. I mean, to be the first person to see them, and you got to keep, close-lipped on it for months thereafter until the spring launches come out and show everyone what they are. And it's just like, it's a really cool feeling. And yeah, seeing what those new machines are capable of. And that's been a theme, I think, talking to lots of people on the podcast, is just like, where does sledding go from here? And you've seen it. You've been on that leading edge. Every year you've got to be up on it. Okay, new tracks, new suspension, new chassis, new motors and turbos and everything else. Where do you see the sport going in the future?
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I'm continuously blown away by each year how they progress. You know, it's like, wow, you get on a machine and it's like you ride it and you actually say, wow, like how do they do this? And something new comes out next year, and even sometimes when it's just incremental improvements. Like last year, for example, we were riding the Polaris with the 325 track, and I mean that's not really like a, you know, it's not like a groundbreaking improvement or whatever, but wow, we noticed a difference for sure, definitely from that 3-inch lug track that they had before, in the way that it just pops up out on the snow. And we were out there on a deep day testing it and getting stuck in creeks and doing everything that mountain riders do, and getting good feel for it. So, yeah, I don't know where it's going. I'm happy to see that we have a factory turbo machines out there that are like 180 horsepower. Like,
Aren't on warranty. Yeah, they go
like,
back.
When we started Mountain Sledder, that was not a thing, and it was a dream maybe, but it was like at the time, you know, it was big turbo 4-strokes on propane or whatever. Guys were doing extreme stuff at that time just to be able to do those kind of things that they wanted to do on a sled. And now they're just pumping out of the factory like that. So,
you know what? Overall, you mentioned like doesn't necessarily need to be okay when you come out with a turbo. That's a huge, change, a big market shift. But I think honestly, what I've noticed even in the past short term 5 years is the small little things that they've done to chassis improvements that really help myself or riders in my group having more energy at the end of the day. Like, to initiate turns, to side hill a little bit easier, to use, let's say, like 5% less energy in all areas of the sled, end up being big improvements after a day of mountain riding, where your shoulders aren't as, sore, your back isn't as sore, and you just have a little, like, that much more stamina. It seems like at the end of the day, rather than like fighting the sled, now it's like more ergonomically set up to like ride in the conditions that we like to, which is typically pretty technical, tighter trees, and you always seem to be on a slope, whether it's up or down, So I find it's really cool to see all those small changes like you're mentioning equate to this huge change overall in the whole chassis and riding and enjoyment of backcountry sledding.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And that's one thing that I always talk about is just that if it's easier to ride, like you say, you're going to have more energy at the end of the day. You're going to be able to get better places, even if the chassis is not necessarily designed to be more technical or used in technical terrain. If you have better control of it because it's easier to ride, you're going to be able to take it into that terrain and go there more comfortably. I think so. Like you said, those changes in the handling of the sleds have been huge over the years. And coming back to that conversation we were having about Rob, when we were riding that day with him, I was riding on, I think I was on like it was like a 2010 Summit, whatever XP they were at the time. And it was just set up horribly. Yeah. And there was one spot where we were trying to get into, and that's interesting too. Like, that's a whole nother conversation, is like, guys like me trying to keep up with professional athletes,
accessing,
bringing camera gear and everything. That's something you struggle with, obviously, but you're a great rider, which probably a lot of people don't know. But anyways, just trying to keep up with Rob, and he was riding on that new XM and trying to, cut in to get into some fresh snow and everything. And I was having a heck of a time. And I'll admit it here, I'm embarrassed to say, but Rob at one point had to ride my sled up to get up, through this little crux and into the next little spot. And he got off and he was like, oh man, that thing is like set up bad. It's like hard to ride. And that made me feel a little bit better.
I'm here to tell you, you're not the first or the last person Rob Alford is going to ride their sled. I think that's pretty cool. But that's it. It's just like, I think a lot of people have this, vision of, professional sledding means like, okay, well, the camera guys get in this helicopter in the morning and they have their cappuccino and they go get dropped off on this mountainside and they film all day and until the sun kind of gets close to going down, then they get brought back to the hot tub. Yeah, right. It is up before dawn. You got your own sled. You got to do your own maintenance on it because the riders, we're not relying on the professional athletes to do the maintenance on our sled. So yeah, you kind of have to be a bit of a jack of all trades to be decent at sledding, have a decent vehicle to access these zones, because even getting, to the parking lot sometimes can be a bit of a chew and, adventurous in itself. And then getting to these zones, then being a proficient camera operator, whether you're shooting stills or video or drone or whatever, to be able to capture this, and you do not want to miss it. There's a lot on your shoulders when, say, Alfred's going off or Nadine's doing a big drop or something like that. You don't want to miss that because it's not like there's a redo. You're not going to just ask, oh, can you, I forgot to hit the shutter button. You want to go do that again?
Like, how bad are you going to feel if, like somebody does something amazing or epic or, and they're taking risks when they do it too. And if you miss it or you blow it or whatever, I mean, I think that's part of having a production or a productive day as a team is, the athlete can go out there and get it done, and whoever's filming or taking the photos, like they're not missing the shots either. They're getting good ones out of it. So
are there any shots that you've set up for that you're like, man, this is going to be banger, and then it ends up being so, or like vice versa, that you're like, yeah, this is going to be a so-so shot, and you look at it after on the big screen and you're like, holy.
Yeah, definitely. And both ways, sometimes it turns out better than you thought, or sometimes, it's like, but one spot that makes me think of that is like the turtle gap. And I don't know. It's like it's almost like you can only shoot it one way, and I want to see it shot a different way. Like I want it to just really pop. And for me, it's just like never really that angle from down below. You kind of, there's that hill to the side that you could shoot from, but it's just like there's never really been an angle that really
justifies that.
Yeah, shows off like what
It's huge.
Yeah, and it's really cool. It's like a cool feature. It's well known, and but yeah, that's one of those ones that's kind of always just like didn't quite work out as well. But then there's other shots, where like, you've got a cool rock feature in the background, and then boom, some big explosive like action, and it's just like, turns out really cool,
super crisp. We talk about the turtle gap, and it's pretty iconic these days. The Sweets come over and they flipped it, and lots of people hit it. It's pretty cool. We were filming sled necks years and years ago, and we talked Robbie Alford from Revelstoke, and we were in a pretty cool group. Jeff Kyle, Chris Brown, Robbie, and I were filming up in Turtle in that area. And I remember Robbie at this time had a 2010 Cat that he had turboed, and it ran like, older classic turbos like that, where it runs really good or it doesn't run at all.
Yeah.
And fortunately for us, it was a deep day, sun happening midwinter, February, and a pretty all-star crew going on. And we drop into the video bowl, which had been filmed a lot up to that point. And I remember just looking over at that gap and saying, like, do we think we can make this gap? And Robbie on his turbo, I remember we shoveled in that whole thing, and he was the first one to ever hit it on a 2010 turboed Cat.
Wow, cool.
Green hood. Yeah. So now you see it like that 2010 it would have been. So
that was the first time, hey?
That, as far as I know, that was the very first time the turtle gap had ever been hit. So, and then after that, Browner hit it on he was running a Yamaha at the time.
Yeah.
So he hit it after that. And then Jeff Kyle was doing some pretty cool drops and stuff right in that similar zone there. So
yeah, now it seems like everybody's hitting that gap. Or like, it's like, you got a backflip to make it cool now.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. What's next?
What is that? 13 years later. Yeah. 14 years later now. It's just really cool to go back to some of those old Sled Necks films and be like, oh man, those are iconic drops and jumps.
Yeah, they were doing big stuff back then.
Oh yeah. Yeah, not to take away. I mean, their sleds, we always had that challenge. Nowadays, it's like, well, stock turbo with warranty that runs like every other sled out there.
Yeah.
You could just roll up to that with a lot more confidence and stuff. But yeah, it's really cool to see what those guys were doing on the old sleds for sure.
Yeah. I just recently, I saw a clip of like Borch going absolutely huge off something, on like a whatever, like, I don't even know what, Rev, I think, right? Like probably an 04 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And, some of his first flips were like, I think on an 06 Rev, and that big step down in Stewart always comes to my mind. I think that might have been a Roops film, but just huge stuff on archaic technology we look back on now. Like, where would those guys have been had they had the sleds of today? The BJ Murrays and the Jeff Kyles and all these guys, Chris Brandt and Dan Adams flipping on an old wedge or whatever that thing was. It's just like, it's crazy to see what they were doing.
It's interesting to think about, like, what could they have done, and there's like a human limit too, there's only so much of the human body can take in terms of like forces and everything.
Oh yeah. The G forces.
Yeah.
Well, and look at their suspension back in the day. They were doing seat bounces because they had to, not, because that was the only thing to take up the cushion. The shocks and stuff just weren't there. The suspension travel wasn't there. And they were kind of waiting for deeper snow. I think they kind of had to, or else, like you said, the body limitation would have been there. But
yeah. And even still, I mean, like, modern sleds, the suspension isn't bottomless. I was in Revelstoke, I think it was 2 winters ago, in spring, with Andreas and Albin Johansson. And they were doing bonkers stuff, obviously, because those guys are just nuts. And one thing that Andreas I was asking him about it, but he was landing sometimes like beside the seat, like beside the chassis. And he was saying it's because, like, you know, if you're coming down huge, then you're not like smashing into the seat or, you know, like the tunnel of the sled.
Wild to think that he does that, you know.
Yeah, and like when you're whipping it, you know, if he's whipping it out or you're naturally on that side anyways, you can just like kind of plunk in the snow to like absorb some of those forces. But man, he hit this one thing and it was just like he was in space, like he was gone, you know. And yeah, when he came down, it's like, how's he not, you know, like, should we have brought a wheelchair up here? Is this guy like a retarded, you know?
Is that it?
But yeah, he bounced right up and was his usual bubbly self.
We talk about, you know, the Swedes quite a bit coming over, and I think they have a big influence, whether it's, you know, KJ from back in the day, hawking big handmade stuff that he'd put together, which was really incredible on the mechanical side, but also on the riding side.
That's kind of like his legacy, isn't it? Just like
so cool.
Patching stuff together.
Working with him back in the day was a breath of fresh air, because there really wasn't anything that couldn't have been done mechanically or, you know, kind of on the sled. He would kind of look at things differently and definitely push some boundaries, and really talented on the sled. What athlete do you think you are like watching closely right now to be like, and that guy is really pushing boundaries? I mean, like Caleb Kosterky down in the States.
Yeah. I remember watching Caleb when he was like just kind of coming up, and he was, you know, yeah, you could just tell by watching him early on. When he was really doing those like kind of tight tree stuff before he kind of got into like more freestyle, I guess. And I think he was like 17 or something.
He was young, yeah.
Just young. And yeah, he was somebody that I thought like, wow, this kid is, you know, has the talent at that age, and obviously the determination.
The drive, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like he's a highly driven individual.
You can see by how he works out and keeps himself in physical shape to be able to throw the sled around like he does, because he's a machine on it.
Totally. And speaking of like you know, like people being professional riders, I mean, he's someone that dedicates a lot of time, obviously in the gym, being physically prepared for the kind of stuff that he's doing. And when you see it, it just looks effortless. And you think like, how could I do that? Well, you know, also look at him, like the guy's jacked. So that's part of it, you know, like that professional preparation that he does.
It's like any other sport, right? Whether you're a football player, basketball, whatever. If you're not in the gym training or preparing, or, you know, it's one thing to be putting the hours on the sled and getting comfortable. And, you know, Nadine Overwater talked about like an extension of yourself. You got to get to a point where it feels like that, where it doesn't feel like you're riding a machine anymore. It's more just like, I want to go there. So this is where you place yourself on the sled. And that's what you see when he does it. But I think it's hours to get to that point. Not just riding, but also physically preparing yourself to be able to, like you mentioned, Robbie hanging off the side of that sled. Like, you know, how many guys would be able to do that with one arm to hold a sled from just completely wadding itself? Determination, sure, because it's a prototype sled. But the other thing is like, you got to have the physical power to do that.
Yeah,
so.
A lot of strength and some, in that case, probably some incentive.
I think there was.
Yeah.
So yeah, Kosterky's really cool. What about back in the day when you first got in the sled industry? Who was that name that you like kept coming up? I mean, obviously like Brandt is probably still one of the biggest icons in the industry, but was there anyone else that you kind of looked up to coming up into the sled industry?
Yeah, I guess so. Well, in terms of like people that we worked with, being a Canadian publication, obviously a lot of the Canadian riders we worked with because they're closer, and, you know, it's like our culture is a little bit different than theirs, I would say. So we're definitely more closely intertwined with those people. And Chris Brown was one guy that we worked with quite a bit. You know, he did like some riding tips for the magazine and that kind of stuff. And he was, you know, obviously pretty prominent at that time. That was, I guess, kind of before he kind of had a couple big, well, I mean, he's had a lot of wrecks, I guess. But so yeah, like in the early days, I'd say that he was a guy that we kind of worked really closely with. And then, yeah, sort of just the Revelstoke. I mean, we've been based out of Golden all along, so, you know, the Revelstoke scene's the closest, and it's kind of like, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but I mean, there's so many riders there, and
it's the Mecca. It's the best in the world.
Yeah, everybody wants to ride there. So people come there. It's easy to meet up there, and and photos and videos and that kind of stuff. And
This picture in behind you, that was shot in Revelstoke, was it?
no, actually, that one was shot in the States. Actually,
Oh, no way. You
Yeah.
got to go a long ways to be able to
yeah,
capture them.
that's Donovan Skelton. So
On a
he
cat.
shot for Slednex.
Yep.
For years, and
Contributed
yeah,
with
we were
509
doing.
for a while too, yeah.
Pardon me.
Contributed with 509 for a while, yeah.
Yeah, and so he came down with us one year to do a shoot for some of the new sleds. For I think it would have been model year 2017 or 2018, maybe something like that. And like a lot of camera guys, every once in a while they just want to do some riding themselves. So
Turned out cool.
yeah, I just popped a couple shots off while he was just goofing around, and turned out a pretty good shot.
You mentioned Browner. That's another guy that has done some pretty big stuff on his sled for sure. He reposted one the other day, a picture online, and it was one of his like train gaps where he's jumping over top of a train. It's like those guys, the compound films, the sled neck stuff, what they were doing freestyle wise and trick wise and big air wise was just definitely pushing boundaries again on older machines, older technology. But those guys were fearless, man.
I know. And that's something that, when I've been out shooting with athletes, is something that I've always been concerned about. Obviously, primarily is their health. Like, you want everyone to come home at the end of the day and be healthy. And, these guys are motivated to do big stuff. And you're kind of just along for the ride a little bit of what they're, willing or able to do that day. And, it's always made me a little bit nervous, I guess. It's just like watching riders do stuff that's, like hazardous, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, Browner's certainly one of those guys that's done some stuff that's really mind blowing.
He's pushed some limits for sure.
And but you get really cool footage out of it, and it looks awesome, and it changes people's perspectives about what is capable. So
What do you think manufacturers think when, say, Browner's on an Arctic Cat or whatever he was back in the day, and he was doing these huge? Do you think it blew their minds, like people back at the factory in Minnesota or wherever, to be like, that's what our sleds can do?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Yeah, because they don't design it to do that. They design it to ride in the mountains, and I would say the average mountain rider is pushing their machines harder now than they probably have in the past. The average one. So yeah, no, I don't think they're designing them for that. And they're probably, they're probably sitting in the same chair as us, kind of with their jaw on the floor a little bit like, wow. And it's, it's still going. But they're building incredible machines. The capability of them blows my mind. And, sometimes people complain about, oh, well, this breaks down or that breaks down or whatever. And it's like,
But look what's going right.
Like,
it's 1,001 things to go right to get you there.
yeah. And look at the performance we're getting out of these things. Like it's pretty much like, the horsepower to weight ratio it's pretty much Formula One,
That's crazy.
And the places that we can go now compared to, 10, 12 years ago, when I kind of started getting involved in the industry, it's insane.
Where did you come from? What background? What sport kind of did you do growing up?
Well, I did a lot of sports, but skiing, I grew up in Northwestern Ontario. So there's a number of little ski hills where I grew up, and that was a passion of mine. So after university, I wanted to move out west, and
That was such a dream of so many people.
Yeah.
Eastern Canadians.
yeah,
Like
it really is.
how many people do you meet from Whistler, Pemberton that have, the Dan Treadways and
Yeah.
things like that have come from,
Yeah.
that area?
Yeah, well, Ontario and Quebec have pretty good, like ski culture. And so even though the mountains are a little bit smaller, it's like the passion for it is still there, and it's not any less because of the size of the mountains. And so, you really want to do the best. It's the same reason why people sled in Revelstoke, right? They've seen the videos, and they dream of it, and they make it part of their life to come out here, even if it's just for a holiday or to ride for a week or a couple days even. So yeah, I think people in Ontario and Quebec, they want to be part of that big mountain experience, really. And
Yeah.
so that drew me out here. So I moved here basically for the skiing, but I grew up snowmobiling in Ontario. At my dad's, we always had snowmobiles. And so it was pretty natural progression, I think, to buy them here, to just start accessing at first ski and snowboard train. And then, I mean, it's so much fun. It's everybody has that story, right? Like, oh, I used to access ski and snowboard train, and then I just stopped, I left that stuff at home.
Yeah. Put on the sled boots instead of the ski and snowboard boots when you're out sledding, because it's almost
yeah.
fun.
I used to snowmobile and ski boots for a while. And it's no fun at all.
No.
Yeah. So I just left that stuff at home.
As kids, you're driving down the highway and you look over and you see a ski hill, like Kicking Horses, just on the outskirts of town. And it's kind of overshadowing town and all this. And you're like, wow, you imagine you get a fresh dump and you get free access to that ski hill.
Yeah.
You helped in lining that up, where we did actually get access to Kicking Horse one spring, and it was unreal to get free, legal, public access onto a ski hill. It was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, that's like never going to happen again, right?
Yeah,
or,
no.
It's like, yeah, you can't imagine the opportunity to go. But I was thinking about this. I think I've had my sled up there 3 times now. There was that time. There was another time when we did, it was like there was like a free ski team or whatever for the ski hill, where it was like, so, I think it was probably after season, we went up, did some photo shoots and stuff like that. And I think there was one other time too. But yeah, it's just so weird to have a snowmobile somewhere where, unless you're a ski patroller and you're using it for work or whatever, but to have a mountain sled there, it's just.
You're probably the only guy that's ever been on Kicking Horse 3 times with a mountain sled.
With a snowmobile? Yeah, that might be true. Yeah.
Maybe Bernasconi's been up there. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
So with the magazine, what are some of the coolest articles you remember from the past, 8+ years or whatever you've been involved in it, however long it's been now? What are some of the things that you remember as like highlights of being like, oh man, those were just epic trips, epic days?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question.
It's so deep.
I mean, we've done so much. In terms of the magazine, the stories that kind of stick with me are, I think, like the human interest stories. The ones that just kind of go beyond specs of a sled, obviously. And road trip stories are cool, and they're really cool for the people that were on it. And if they can kind of convey, what was special about that experience, that's pretty cool. But definitely, like working through the magazine, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise. I've been out to like Sea Campy, and I've been out to Grizzly Lodge, and I've been on trips all around the interior.
West Yellowstone we mentioned.
Pardon me?
West Yellowstone.
Yeah, down to yep. And so all those opportunities, I might have done some of them as just like a regular customer or whatever, but to go and do that and not be treated special, but just to feel like
you're in
part of the inside,
you're part of the group. Yeah.
It's been really, I'm appreciative of that, because it was really cool to go and meet all these people within the industry. And, they've been great. One thing I reflect on often is just meeting people down, from Polaris and all the manufacturers actually, but the engineers and the people that build the machines or design them, and just talking to them about, because they're so passionate about it, and they have this unique knowledge that just nobody else has. And to be able to talk to them and just discuss what they're designing and what they've done and why, and to have them ask you for your feedback. Well, what do you think about this, or how do you like this? I mean, it's like, wow, like, you care about that. But yeah, so that part of the whole experience has been really great. And I think just, I don't know, meeting people and hearing their stories, I think has probably been what, stuck with me the most over the course of doing all of it.
It is cool to be able to get access to some of the engineers. You mentioned, them taking your feedback, and it is valuable because they don't live out west or don't spend as much time and don't have as tight of a connection you do to, their market group or target market out here. So you do, I think, can bring so much value to them. But I do remember specifically, I think, someone had just launched the 850 and I was at a snow show and got access to talk to some of the actual developers of that engine. And I'm a bit of a gearhead myself, so I like understanding like, is it forged internals, or what'd you use for the, the aluminum, the pistons, or whatever those concepts are. And it's just like, it's so cool to know that you're talking to the, the men and women who actually put that thing together.
Yeah, and they have a reason for everything too.
Yeah,
it's not like
absolutely.
You're like, why did you decide to do this? And they're like, I don't know. That doesn't happen. It's like, because of this reason.
Yeah.
Or we had to do that because of this a limitation here, or we got to do this or whatever, and it worked out awesome. They always have a very specific reasoning for it. And it's interesting to see, because I kind of can see both sides. It's like a little bit of industry insight, and then you get the public opinion, which, you see on social media and stuff. And there's a lot going on that, the general public just doesn't know about or understand. Right, yeah. So, like a lot of times they'll make a claim about something. Oh, why didn't they do this way or whatever? And it's like, they had a reason.
Yeah.
They're not talking about it because, it's like they can't spend every waking minute
worrying about
justifying everything or whatever,
Yeah. You didn't see the 10 things engineering wise that got to that point, why they used that material, why they sourced it from that country, or why they got that, there's so many things to consider unless you work in the industry. We get to see a small portion of it just being behind the scenes and being, having the curtains brought open a bit to our eyes, but that's just it. They can't just, why did that chain break or whatever? It's just like, well, there's
a decision made somewhere along the line, and everything's intentional and informed.
Yeah.
Their decision. So,
So one of the cool things when I was talking with the engine engineers for the motors, and one looming thing in the back of my mind, always in the backcountry, is just like, how long is this thing going to last? As we know with two strokes, that they do have a life expectancy. And you talked earlier, like power to weight ratio is similar to a Formula One car. Maybe we won't go that far, but
yeah, maybe okay.
but definitely like some of the best motorsports or power sports out there in the world today. As far as like leader bikes and things like that, they are over 200 horse, so like more than your modern day SUV, and yet 550 pounds. One looming thing in the back of my mind is always just like, okay, you're 4 ranges back, or you're, like 70 miles from the trucks. If this thing decides to give you feedback or a hiccup, how are you going to get that thing out? And it's always just like on the long line of a heli, because you are not towing this thing out of there. So that's always been in the back of my mind whenever I'm riding, especially like growing up in the 80s, riding sleds, and they're not nearly as reliable as they are today. And they didn't have the technology or anything like that. And you always had yourself in predicaments trying to get sleds out. So I asked that engineer, I said, like, okay, this is a brand new motor. This is awesome, whatever else. But like, we ride these things up long drainages, and you are at times holding this thing, wringing its neck for, 60, 80, 90 seconds straight. You can see some of Brant's posts when he's riding his GoPros, and he's on this turbo and he's just got this thing wicked for, like what seems like eternity. What is going to hold that thing together? And they kind of laughed a little bit, and they just said, at the elevations you guys ride, and we were talking about a naturally aspirated sled at this point, they said the elevations you guys ride, this thing's making, 20 less horse or 30% less horse or whatever it is.
Yeah.
We're not worried about that. They said that's totally fine. That thing will live through all that all day long. As long as you run the right oils, run good fuel, treat it decent.
Mm-hmm.
They were just kind of laughing at the idea that thing was going to, lay over in a expected time zone, whatever that is, kilometers or hours wise. But it was just like, that they were not concerned in the least. So ever since then, it's given me this like bit of confidence to say like, okay, they exactly aren't doing this by accident or picking out components or metallurgies by accident. It's like they know what they're doing.
Yeah, and they've thought of that, right?
Yeah, it's just so cool to be able to have access for that for a split second to say like, okay, yeah, this made
you feel better.
Yeah,
about
it made me feel so much, because I'm always like,
you got a lifetime of reassurance now when your Ford range is back that everything's going to be just fine.
That's it.
Yeah, like that thing, that 850 is pumping out like 115 horse or something at those upper elevations or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So they weren't worried about stress on the crank or con rods or pistons or anything like that. It was all okay to them.
Still though, you're listening for every little thing though, right? When you've just got to tape that long.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a growing up early on in sledding, but you notice every little, hiccup or every little thing with the sled, and you stop for a second. You're like, oh my gosh, your heart stops beats.
Yeah.
And you just think about that. And I don't know if new sledders today would understand that, because sleds are literally like genuinely so good that it's just, do they ever have to go through that period where it's just like, what do you mean it doesn't run? What do you mean it doesn't start? Like, this is so foreign. Back in the day, it was like,
yeah. Well, maybe that's falling out of part of like mountain sledding. I mean, that traditionally that's been part of the adventure, is like, you're probably going to tow somebody out of there, right? Like I remember towing, like out of the way back at Chatter Creek, like Summit 670s, with exploded chain case or whatever, like stuff like that, and that was all part of the fond memories afterwards. And part of the experience and cutting your teeth in sledding and learning about what can go wrong and being prepared. And I guess people now that maybe are getting into it with more reliable machines are, maybe that's not part of the experience for them, or they don't, or they don't know.
Or the difficulty accessing the backcountry terrain. It would have been, a lot of times would have been the first one punching this stupid goat trail up through the trees. Well, like back, like nowadays it's kind of like, well, there's more logging roads cut to the Alpine and you're kind of into it quicker. Or, Sled Golden, the Golden Snowmobile Club, all these places just like have such a better rapport for grooming right up to where you need to get to, so it's just like they don't know those hardships of towing skimmers with 5 pails of gasoline in because your sled's just sloppy through it. And nowadays everything's fuel injected, direction. It's just like, it's a whole different game.
Yeah. And even we're coddled a little bit. Like I never was around in the time of like, carb jetting or anything like that. So, I mean, the old timers look at us and they're like, oh, come on, what are these guys talking about here? But I mean, it's going to get progressively easier, but hopefully the experience becomes more just about the joy of riding than it is about, the hardships of doing it. And maybe that was, sort of a bit of a gatekeeper situation where it was like people who weren't super mechanically savvy or whatever is maybe holding them back from getting into like some real mountain sledding adventure that they can access now.
And it's almost like that, like you mentioned, gatekeeper. That's what it was, I think. To be a true backcountry sledder in the day, you almost had to be like at very least, a very qualified hobbyist mechanic to be able to get that sled there.
Yeah, or be riding with a guy that is.
Yeah, or at least in your group, you had this one guy that was just an ace.
Doesn't everybody have a guy in the group that's carrying like all the tools and
everything?
Yeah.
In our case with Dwayne Suhan, it was he would carry a sawzall and a hammer so he could put up signs and stuff.
Oh, nice. Hey, well prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that was Riley and I talked about his dad, when he grew up and the sleds he rode, and that's what it was. Same thing I can attest, 1984 Polaris Star, I think, was my first sled, and it was jetting, and the hardships of that. You go out with a group of 10 plus people, and 30 to 40% of that group almost every single time was coming back behind a tow rope. Like it just wasn't, it wasn't the same as it is today for sure, where like you have one guy drop out of a group of 10 and it's just like kind of odd,
Yeah. Well, you asked about, like what are the kind of stories that stick with me over the years of doing Mountain Sledder. And one of them is the story that Nadine Overwater wrote about the old days, like Dusty Wiedemann. And all his photography that he took on the old, it was like they were pioneering Boulder, basically, right? On
there's a trail named after him up Boulder.
Yeah, and some of the pictures from the article were amazing. But just I look at those pictures and I read that story and I just thought, oh man, that would be so fun. Like they're hardly like they'd spend 2 days breaking up to where the cabin is now, and that would be their weekend, basically. Like. But to me, that just sounds so fun. Just like the adventure of it. Nobody else is doing it.
Yeah.
You're the only ones.
Yeah.
And you're just seeing what's possible.
Well, and I think in different sports today, like people still love, skinning into remote cabins and things like that, where you're really isolated. And I think it adds that level of adventure and danger to it, where it's just like you are very isolated, very remote. And if anything goes wrong, it's like you have to have your ducks in a row to get out of there alive. But mountain sledding is no different. Things can happen in a quick when you're in the middle of nowhere, hundreds of kilometers from the truck. It's easy to get out there when everything's going right. But if it doesn't, it's just like, how do you get back, right? So I think, the sport is definitely changing. It's more accessible, I think, today for so many different people at so many different levels, whether you got a reliable 200cc sled for, young teenagers or kind of younger kids and stuff like that. Or, everything up to a 200 plus horsepower turbo and everything in between. And it's just really cool to see that you just go down to your dealership and pick it up. And family day doesn't necessarily just mean riding on trails. It could be in the backcountry.
Mm-hmm. And there are guys, like it seems like it wouldn't be the case, but I saw a guy at the Edmonton Sled Show this year that was going out and just his buddies were all riders. And he was not a rider, but he wanted to get in on it. And so he had ordered a brand new sled, and he was there like at the show getting like avalanche backpack and everything, like everything.
Fully kitted out.
Yeah. And I mean, how often does that happen? Not very often. But I think part of what with Mountain Sledder is that we tried to do was to make sure to help people that are new or easing their way into the mountain sledding, be prepared and ready for anything. Even if they didn't grow up with that experience, or, you know, they're not necessarily like an avid outdoors person that knows what to do in a first aid emergency in the backcountry, or someone who's mechanically inclined, who knows how to fix a machine or whatever, even if they're, you know, with a group of buddies, that they at least be prepared for what could happen. And so that was kind of one thing that we always tried to do, was just to, especially the avalanche, you know, story, and just overall preparedness and being safe out there. That was a message that we tried to get across quite a bit.
I know one story that I was featured in was about my pickup truck and some of the sled haulers. You know, some of those fringe stories too, like they get a lot of traction. A lot of people like that sort of stuff. It's not just about the sleds and getting to the mountain, whatever. It's like the adventure exterior of sledding, and it brings together this whole community, whether you're into, you know, motorsports or trucks or summer. Like, what do you do in the summer and all these sorts of things? And just a lot of fun, I think, to see different aspects of sledding bring everyone together like that.
Yeah, like people love trucks.
Who doesn't,
wants to
right?
see that? So,
and sled haulers especially. You go into the Boulder parking lot, and it's just like, it is a show of what Brent series trailer you've got that year, and what lifted pickup, and the newest Duramax or whatever. It is part of sledding for sure.
Yeah, and I have appreciation for the guys that are, you know, not just going out and buying the coolest, biggest trailer, but the guys that, and that's why we featured it in the magazine, like your truck and Andrew Munster's truck, and some of the guys that are building some really cool things out there, and they're doing it with their hands. And that's a big part of the culture for sure.
In our case, I think it was a 70 series and a 60 series truck. They weren't the newest, but they had a lot of character.
Sure. But modernized in a lot of ways, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and beautiful trucks. So that's cool. You know, and the mountain sledding culture, it's tied into all that stuff. You know, like people that appreciate cars and trucks and machines. It's more than just an outdoors activity. It's tied into all those things.
What are you doing these days around Mountain Sledder? Are you still contributing?
Yeah, a little bit. Kind of just been helping out in the transition to the magazine's new editor, Adam. And my plan is to kind of just keep my fingers in a little bit and contribute here and there. And we don't really have a full picture of what that looks like, but I want to stick around. And I just, you know, I've made so many friends over the years, and had, like I said, so many cool opportunities and adventures with folks like yourself and other people. So I definitely don't want to just get totally shut out of all that, you know.
It's in your blood now. You're never going to leave it.
Yeah.
I think that's it too, is when you get to this point of sledding, whether it's like Cody Borgers, Nadine Overwater, Riley Suhan, it'll always be a part of your life, I think, right? And that's what we're seeing when we do the podcast here, is with a lot of these people, is it's just like, at whatever capacity you're doing, or whatever hat you're wearing, it's just like, you know, Aaron Bernasconi's president of the Snowmobile Club, and, you know, Nadine's a professional avalanche forecaster and different things like that. But it's just always in and around that sled community. And I think you're in it now for good.
Yeah. Well, I hope so, you know. And I look forward to still getting out and riding with, all those people, and probably bring my camera, you know.
Absolutely. Snap some stills.
Yeah, always, you know, if the opportunity is there, you should capture it, I think. So
that is one thing that I find myself bad at too, is that even when you're riding with friends or whatever, you still want to bring at very minimum a GoPro or something, because it's just like, man, when those days are so good, you want to enjoy it. You want to enjoy it, but you want to also capture it, right? You want to share that, man, this day was so good.
Yeah, because it is so good, and it's like, it would feel like a missed opportunity to just capture that moment for time. And every time you ride, there's always something, you know. I was riding with my friends Sean and Cody last year, and Cody just absolutely destroyed his track, it exploded into a million pieces. And so we, he was we were zip tying it back together and stuff so he could try and get back to the truck, and he did. But it was just it was shredded, and it was supposed to be just a fun day. I didn't bring all all my big camera gear, but I was like, oh, I should have, because this is cool, and this would be a cool story, or even just a little tidbit about, okay, well, this happened.
How'd you get out?
Yeah, how are you going to deal with it?
And share it with others.
Yeah, totally. So it's hard to go just have a fun day and just ride and without being able to at least capture a memory of something that happened along the way.
What do you think the best, like most enjoyable zone you've ever been to when you've been working with Mountain Sledder? You think Chatter's probably some of the funnest areas you've had, or what do you think?
Chatter's a really cool area because it's just so different from it's so big. Everything's so big there. And the only real reason that you can explore it is because of all the cat roads. So, after they shut down their cat skiing operation for the year, they invite people to come stay at the lodge, which I've been fortunate to do again through the magazine. And it was an awesome experience. But the terrain is so mind blowing out there, and it's just big alpine, and you can see forever, and you're so high. You're higher there riding than a lot of areas or any other areas, I think, in the Golden area at least.
Yeah, Aaron said at one point they were over at 11,000 feet.
Yeah, it gets high up in the back there, and I always want to go farther though. It's like every year I'm like, oh, well, we've been here a couple times. Like, let's go, let's keep going. Like, what's around the next bend? So that spot's really cool, especially for if you just really wanted to go see some really cool stuff.
And you're right, the whole culture at the lodge. Like, what is it? Aaron said it was like 40 rooms or 70. Like, it's a huge lodge.
Yeah,
like,
when you roll up to it for the first time, you're like, wow, that is a large building.
Very impressive.
Yeah, well, it's like two buildings, and then there's a like a breezeway in between the two. And then they have a couple other outbuildings and stuff. But yeah, it's just like huge. Right. It's
legit,
super cool. When we go there, it's always in spring, so like usually the snow could be hit and miss. It's not like I've never been there in the spring and just been like, whoa, this is just it's epic deep snow or anything like that. But I've had some of those days, but that's definitely one of them. And I think anytime I've gone somewhere new, it's like that special experience that you were talking about, where it's like that's what I love about mountain sledding is exploring, and seeing new things for the first time, even if it's a zone that's people ride. You get in on a fresh dump, it feels like you're like.
Well, and it could be, there's been areas in Boulder that people ride by, and literally thousands of people a day will ride by this, where we just pop off the trail, go up, and if you don't know it's there, if you're not looking or you're not exploring, you can ride right by it. And it's some of the best riding, and it's like, within a mile of the cabin that everyone's at. But here you are just riding freshies all day, new lines, not on any tracks. And you're right, it's just like, it doesn't have to be some 4-hour driving adventure to get there. It could just be right in the backyard and you not even know it, unless you're, trying to explore and find these little nooks and crannies.
Yeah, Boulder's kind of crazy for that. Like, I feel like you could be within a mile of the cabin and still like find some untracked spot that's, the accessibility of the whole mountain and the sides of it. It's, I've been to Boulder, I don't know, probably 20 times, 25, something like that. Like I've been there a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I could get lost easily there.
It's wild.
I just think like that place in particular is just the way that it's just amazing for that type of stuff. Yeah. So yeah, there's adventure out there, right? It's you just got to look for it, and you don't even have to look that hard.
There's been a couple of adventures around here we've done. One that comes to mind, that polar vortex one with Riley Suhan and his dad Dwayne. Well, we left Golden, it was minus 32, and we started heading north up the Columbia. And yeah, it's pretty cool to know that you're in a zone that no other sledder has ever been before. There's kind of just like that when you break out of the trees or over this one knoll or over one zone into another bowl, and you're just like, whoa, this is such a cool feeling. We did that one, and then we did one years ago with Rob Alford, Riley Suhan again, and then Nadine Overwater was working forestry up in this really cool zone and was able to take us in there. And she was kind of just like, again, just straight up adventure. Like, I don't know if we're going to make it. I think we could probably try and access it. And it was a 100% pure adventure with the four of us. And it was so fun, again, to be able to like achieve that goal of saying like, she scoped it out on Google Earth, and props to her for, having this vision and bringing us along with it and getting up out of the tree line onto that ridge and seeing that. And again, being like, there is no other sled that's ever been here. They're pretty cool feeling.
Yeah, I've watched both those episodes, so I think I'm probably one of your bigger fans on the 5-9 films.
You got it bookmarked. You just watch it.
Yeah, just over and over again. But yeah, in those cases, I think the story that you're going for there is that adventure, and even if you didn't make it, maybe that's a productive day for you. And I find whenever we're trying to have a productive shoot day or whatever, sometimes it's better to go to a zone, because then you're just like, okay, I know this little spot around the corner. We can go bang off some shots there, and then we can sneak over here and get this and that. And kind of how it can play out. But like some days when you're into new territory, you spend half the time just like trying to get to a spot or find a spot that's suitable for shooting or find a feature or whatever, that kind of thing. So that can be pretty slow for a shoot day for yourself, I imagine. But like in those cases, I mean, that the adventure is the story.
Yeah.
And
it's less about the quality of the shot and more about the quantity of what you're able to capture. And a lot of times like that, it's just like, I don't care, like, give Riley a GoPro or something and keep it in his breast pocket, but just be like, just pull that thing out and get us some shots. Cause like you said, it's like the film crew is typically, working hard to get there just like the athletes. Well, at some point you got to stop and be like, well, we got to capture something here. Like he's down in a creek piled up and you're wrapped around a tree and you're stuck. And it's just like, we got to stop and capture some of this, but you can get caught up in the moment pretty quick with still trying to achieve that goal and being and knowing the days are short and you got to get up there before lights down and all these sorts of thing. And in the back of your mind, you're still trying to be like, okay, well, we got to dig a pit at some point and get a real good assessment of what this, snowpack is doing right here. And it's just like, oh my gosh, there's a million things to think about. Not to mention, is the truck going to start when we get back to it at, minus 20 or whatever tonight? And
yeah, like it's a full-blown adventure before you even try and make a film out of it, right?
Yeah.
And then you get guys like Borchers who are just like, oh, let's just like shortcut through these trees up here to the next road. And then you're, all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you're like, everybody's stuck halfway up and you're like, what are we doing here? And it's like just to have fun, like along the way. And you're like, Borchers, what the hell, man?
I thought we were trying to get somewhere.
Yeah. And he's like, we're having fun. Yeah.
There is one classic shortcut that we always try and take, and it's right off the bat, going up in a turtle the back way. And there's this old growth section. It's just so fun. But last year, Regan, Cody, and I, and we had a couple others in our group, and we were just like, you can either go, up the single track right here, and it's whooped out and bumpy, or we're going to go try and take the shortcut. And we'll go this way. So Regan, Cody, and I go take the shortcut. Well, we get on the flats, and you got to turn, and it's a pretty aggressive climb to get up. And we turned, and Cody's trench, I'm not lying, is probably 5 feet deep. In like, it's just fluffy, bottomless snow. And he goes to climb, and he's got a longer track than me, and he's making it like 10 feet up this climb, and I'm in his track, and I make it another 10 feet. And here's Regan, like, you can only see his helmet in both of our trenches. Like, and I just turned around immediately. We could spend all day here trying to make this shortcut. We just, at some point, have to just like tail between our legs, turn around, go back out on our tracks and take the long way, because we are never going to make it up. But that's, like you're saying, even on film days when you're got this idea of like, we got to get here, we got to get in the zone, set up and film, just getting there is the adventure.
Yeah, and I'm always the guy that's like, what's the easy way around this thing here?
And where's the B loop?
Yeah, I just like want to save my energy for the day and whatever. And riding with those guys, like, these professional athletes, people that haven't had the opportunity to like truly ride with a professional athlete when they're trying to go somewhere and do a film day and stuff like that, they're like way better riders than, you even think. And
technically,
like I consider myself a pretty decent rider. Yep. And a lot of people do, right? And then you get around some of these athletes and you're like, holy smokes. Like, I feel like I'm on my first day on a mountain sled here. And you got all your camera gear on your way down, and, and they're just like, me up here. And you're like, oh my God, I got to follow them, or I got to get up there, or do this or whatever. And it's that was one thing that was really eye-opening for me, was just like the level, the ability of some of these athletes. Like a guy like Brett Turcotte, man, like he's so skilled.
Great mountain rider.
He just makes everything so easy. And
great jumper, freestyle, does flips, everything T70s. But also, like, when he's riding a 146 in areas that you're having a hard time getting a 165 through, it's just like, oh, okay, these guys aren't just like single discipline athletes that are, he comes from an ISOC background, racing, all that sort of stuff. But you forget that, like, oh, when he's not racing ISOC and he was back home in Clearwater, he was riding backcountry. Yeah. And he is more proficient at that than your average mountain rider by far, so that's it.
Far.
So people are sitting there thinking, they're just like, oh, well, Brett will out jump me or something, or he'll do a bigger drop or something like that. I'm not going to do that. But I mean, like, watch him try and follow me through the trees. And it's like, no, watch you try and follow him through the trees. It ain't happening.
Yeah. He's going to do circles around you. And it's like, he might ride a hill or line through the trees or whatever. And some guys that are really skilled riders can probably, maybe make that same line. But, they're not going to do it pretty. Some guys can't even make it, like try as they might, and it's the kind of thing that he does and makes it look like skilled and,
And it's tough to justify that on the cameras, but I think the one person that does a really good job of showing off how gnarly the terrain is Kosterky. Coming back to that, Caleb throws that sled around, and I think you can see how hard he's working it to get up into some of these things. Because guys like, where Brant's riding in Colorado and stuff is gnarly terrain, and his group down there, but it's just like he almost makes it look too easy. Or Keith Curtis riding a Rimshaw circuit, it almost makes it look too easy, where it's just like he just butters it. Okay, well, you and I can do that. Let's go up there. And yeah, try it. Try going up Jackson. Like going over the top of Jackson, you watch a pro do it, and it's just like, it's kind of rocky and whatever. But no, you stand on that slope and you look down, and it's just like, I ain't doing it, man. I can't do that.
And when you mention Brant stuff, like you watch his YouTube videos of, like the GoPro footage, and he's going up through some trees or whatever. And it's like, GoPro doesn't really do a lot of justice to how steep things are in the first place. But, you think like, okay, oh yeah, you're following along. Yeah, I'd pick that line too. Oh yeah, okay, I'd go that or whatever. And it's like, no, you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't even be there to begin with.
You're dreaming. And then he's got a GoPro because everybody else is at the bottom of the hill. It's the only way he can like produce some social media content for the guy, for himself. So, yeah, it's pretty crazy. And what really impresses me about watching Caleb ride is the way that he's like freestyling and pillows and stuff like that. And he's doing it so aggressively in consequential places. Like, it's a fence of trees right below some big pillow that he goes up, and, he'll do like a bow tie on top of this huge pillow and then jump off it. And, if at any point in time you stopped out or the sled rolled downhill from you or whatever, it's just like trashed.
Yeah.
And he's riding so aggressively in those places with so much confidence.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what a lot of people forget too. Just when the camera zoomed in on him, it's just like, well, A, how do you get to that pillow?
Yeah.
B, how are you doing the maneuver on the pillow? And C, like, how are you riding out of that, safely?
Yeah.
And able to do again, time and time again. It's impressive. So
yeah, and like those pillows probably, I think for the most part, where he rides down in like Sealy area and stuff, they're not like at the bottom of a meadow. It's not like a meadow and then there's just like a hillside with a pillow on it that he's like playing around on. They're like up in the trees. They're up in it. And even just getting there, and then let alone like having the confidence to do some cool stuff when you're there is like, I mean, that's what really impresses me. Well, besides the other things, but like about his riding, it's just like, I don't see a lot of other riders like being that aggressive in that type of terrain.
Pat, what can we look forward to in the magazine this upcoming year?
Well, that is a good question. I don't know. Adam's kind of sort of leading the reins with that, and I'll hopefully come up with some ideas just to kind of feed him of things that I can assign to myself, hopefully.
Some fun jobs.
Yeah, I want to get out there on snow, so be carting the camera around a little bit and doing some of that kind of stuff. And big picture stuff, Adam can kind of worry about that. And the podcast, obviously, here that we're doing right now is new, so that's a pretty good push for Mountain Sledder, I think, and hopefully it does well. Hopefully everyone's listening and enjoying the show here.
And if they don't, they can just contact you directly.
Yeah, complain to, I don't know, don't complain. So I think Mountain Sledder's lucky to have you here, Mike, doing the podcast and, chatting with all the people and the connections that you've made over the years.
It's a lot of fun. I genuinely just enjoy catching up with the athletes. So, I mean, you shoot for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, whatever that timeline is. But it's just like, man, those can really get carried away quick because it's just like there's so many years. I was pulling up footage of Borgers or Nadine or Riley or whoever. And it's just like, you're like going back like a decade now of old sleds and old times, and the riding's improved and everything and all these terrain areas that you've opened up since then. It's just like everything is just, it's cool to see the sport come to where it is now. So having these conversations is a lot of fun. So thanks for having me.
You've been around those guys and built that rapport and all those experiences that you guys have had collectively over the years, like filming and riding together and stuff. It's pretty cool. So
we'll even look back at the Turtle Gap. It's just like, I remember the first day that I know of that gap was ever hit. And it's just like, it's cool to see lots of people enjoying it and, where it's come from. And I think films, magazines, pictures, photos, everything has had a big influence on what their sport is today. I would say, especially in, Western Canada, Western States, is that whole mountain scene is still developing and still kind of raw and new, but it's shaping itself. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm interested to see where it go from here. I mean, the types of maneuvers and stuff that guys are doing on sleds now, it's different, right? You know, they're doing the bow ties and the re-entries and the
270. Seems like everyone's doing a 270 now.
Yeah, like if you do a straight air, it's boring, right? Kind of. So I don't know, like where does it go? But it seems like every year somebody does something new. Barrel roll, like that's crazy. Yeah. Who even thought that was possible on a sled?
Never. And I don't know that it was possible on the older sleds. Like I genuinely don't know that those sleds would have been possible of doing something like that. But here he is, Andreas, pushing the limits, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to be, to see it now, and it's just going to keep progressing. And like we talked about earlier, sleds are just getting better all the time and easier to ride, and you get more places and, I don't know, have more fun. So,
well, Pat, I'm looking forward to getting on the snow with you hopefully this year, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, buddy. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.